Hey Raghunath, tell everyone about our Patreon community.
Sure, Kaustubha. The Wisdom of the Sages Patreon community is an incredible online yoga resource. If you like the type of yoga wisdom and culture we share on the show, then our Patreon community is a great next step. This is a listener-supported podcast, and any level of sponsorship will unlock a wide range of live and archived classes, talks, and even workshops.
Raghunath teaches, I teach, and we have a host of other excellent teachers on topics ranging from yoga philosophy, asana classes, storytelling, Ayurveda, kirtan, cooking, meditation, and a lot more.
We even have an incredible online Bhakti 12-step recovery group.
So if you want to check it out, go to patreon.com/wisdom of the sages.
All right, let's get it on.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Live from Super Soul Farm, this is Wisdom of the Sages, a daily yoga podcast with your host, Raghunath, and co-host and senior educator at the Bhakti Center in New York, Kaustubha Das. Welcome to the show, and welcome to Sleep In Sunday. This is where we start the show a little bit later, and while starting it later, we bring in a special guest on Sunday who's lived a pretty interesting life, and we pick his brain. We want to welcome Eddie Stern. Eddie Stern, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you for having me.
Good, and we're live on Facebook today. We usually do live on Facebook only on the weekends because it's Q&A day and special guest day, and you, my friend, are a special guest. And if you don't know who Eddie is, he's an esteemed teacher of Ashtanga Yoga. He's a co-creator, along with Deepak Chopra, of Urban Yogis, a program that trains youth and young adults in yoga and meditation for the express purpose of supporting the reduction of gun violence in Queens, New York. And Eddie is also the author of One Simple Thing, a new look at the science of yoga and how it can transform your life, which is a best-selling book that examines from both a Western scientific perspective and an Eastern philosophical perspective the underlying mechanisms that make yoga an amazingly effective practice for health, well-being, and spiritual development. Now, that's the official bio, but we just love Eddie Stern. And I've known Eddie at least for 10 years, but he's an old friend of Kaustubha, and we've been like very, very eager to get him on the show because he's had such a massive impact in New York City, but also in the entire world because of his sincerity and his depth in understanding yoga philosophy. And sort of like what we love on this show is not just being good at yoga, but really living the life of a yogi. And I find this guy quite fascinating. I'm really honored to have you, my friend.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, we had you on last time with Mike D.
That's right.
But when you give these rappers a microphone, they just take over the show.
I know, right?
So we had a lot more that we wanted to go back. We wanted to bring you back and speak to you about a lot more. So I'm so happy. It's always a pleasure for me to be with you just as a friend. But it's also I'm really happy to bring to our audience all that you have to share today. And why don't we go ahead and get the plug in, right? Here's the book, One Simple Thing, which is, I've found it to be what I felt it does so well is that a lot of the things that we talk about yoga, that it's good for this and it's good for that, but we don't really, I don't know, we may really not be able to explain it in depth. And I think one important thing that Eddie's done in this book is he's gone into really how the role that yoga, asana, pranayama, other practices of yoga, how they affect the body, how they affect the mind, how that can be advantageous for achieving the spiritual goals of yoga. And then going beyond just like taking it from these ancient texts that say that it's good in these different ways, like let's say for the body or for the mind, then going in and doing a lot of modern research, and bringing modern science into it and showing how it can be not only accepted, like say through faith or ultimately through experience, through a traditional practice, but how modern medicine or modern science backs it up as well, or it can even help us understand it more. So it's a fascinating book. Eddie's a great communicator. So the book, it's an easy read, although it gets into subtle topics. So I thought you really did an amazing job of kind of conveying that, Eddie. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your high praise.
Where will people best find the book online?
People can best find the book on your favorite booksellers online.
Okay.
It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble, I believe. It's on, or if you have a small local bookseller you like who's online right now, you can order it through them.
And I think you have a website. Is it onesimplething.com?
Actually, if you go to eddiestern.com, you can get to One Simple Thing from there. Okay. And on there, you can either go through your favorite bookseller to order the book. And after you order it, if you put in the code number onto another page, you can get some free videos as well.
Some free stuff.
Yeah, some like yoga therapy style videos and things like that. Easy access.
Great.
And honestly, even if you don't order the book and you go to that page and you make up an order number and put it in, you still get the free videos.
Okay. Ooh. So you can beat the system here if you want.
Because I am the system behind that, and I'm easily beatable.
Okay.
So, I never check.
Now, I know you humble introverts will never say this, but I'm going to say it for you. I was living in California, and I hadn't talked
just
with
Raghunath, before you go, I don't know if your mic is hooked up right. I'm not hearing you so loud.
You don't hear me?
I mean, we hear you for sure. We can hear you, but anyway, maybe we should just forget about it and go. Let's just go. Just talk a little loud.
Talk a little louder, that I can do.
I know.
That is one of my specialties, my friend. Talking loud, stepping on people while they're talking. I can do that. Yeah, so you guys probably won't talk about it, but I just want to share with this. I was living in Los Angeles. I hadn't seen Kaustubha in a while, and I was practicing Ashtanga over with, I can't remember the top of my name.
In LA?
Yeah, who was I practicing? Eddie, you know, because we went out to dinner together. Jorgen. I was doing Ashtanga with Jorgen in Los Angeles, and I came back, and Kaustubha was like, "Well, I'm doing Ashtanga too." And me and Kaustubha, like we would just like check in with each other like every year or 2 years or something. So I came back to the East Coast, and he brought me to the Shala, and what you guys had going on was so fascinating that it was like unprecedented in the history of the Western world. It was not just like a yoga school; it was like a temple. It was like a Vedic temple, complete with pujaris, worshiping deities, beautiful artwork along the upper rim.
Architecture, practically, right?
Architecture. And it was like walking into the streets of India. We had Kaustubha doing the aloo tikki up front, or you were making dosas or something. It was like walking into a bazaar. Yeah. It was
Kaustubha's pani puri, shop up in the front.
Nothing that sophisticated, but
and it was incredible. And there were great kirtans there. It was like being in like a Vedic temple in the middle of New York City, and you felt very, very transported. And
I want to build that again. I would love to do that again. It was tragic when we had to close that down. Okay. And I really want to rebuild the temple and get that started again. That was an awesome time. And, coming from New York City and growing up in New York City in the 1970s and the 1980s and all that, there was, because New York was so lawless in those days, and we had so much freedom, you kind of, a lot of us grew up with this idea that if you had an idea and you wanted to do something, you should just do it. Like there wasn't any protocol for not doing something, even doing really stupid things. Like you could just go ahead and do it.
Like light a fire in the middle to a Vedic fire ceremony in the middle of a New York loft.
You could hold a 10-day long Agnihotra in a loft in a 150-year-old building, which is primarily made out of wood, and not really worry about burning the entire thing down. Controlled fire. So, when we had this idea to build the temple in Soho, it didn't strike me as something that, should I really be doing this or not? Or can I, because I got permission and the blessings from my guru to do it. And so as soon as I had those blessings, I thought, well, this is just okay to do. And he came with all the, the priests, Ramachandra and Ramayatreya and Ganesha Bhatt, and they perform the Vedic Pratishtapana, and then we had a temple, and all we had to do was worship and take care of the deity. So there wasn't like this idea like this is a ridiculous thing to do. You're shipping from India 1,200 pounds of stone and brass to build the temple. Like, we just went ahead and did it, and it was awesome and beautiful, and it really, as I've said before, when I was first traveling in India in the 1980s, I was traveling with two friends, and we started after our Shivananda yoga teacher training down in Kerala at Nayar Dam. We took buses and trains to all of the major and some of the minor temples throughout Kerala, in Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. And then we continued our travels by train up to Calcutta and then Benares. And then we went up to Kathmandu, and then we came down by bus and train to Rajasthan and went to some of the temples there. And then we ended up back in Delhi, and that was like a 4-month yatra or something. And in all of these holy places and all of these tirthas, we would stay for a few days. We would unroll our straw yoga mats in a quiet corner of the temple, and we would do our asana and pranayama practice. We would meditate. We would do some chanting. And the yoga practices came alive for me in those temples, particularly of South India, where there was a lot of space to do that. And that's where I felt that my sadhana became my lifestyle, became part of me. And when I came back to New York, I thought it'd be so amazing to have something like this in New York City. And the closest thing that there was the phenomenal and amazing Flushing Temple out in Queens, which takes an hour to get to from New York City. And so this sort of thing was germinating in my mind for many years, like, wouldn't it be amazing to have some kind of a Vedically established temple in Manhattan that that could serve as also a yoga school, so people could practice, and I could practice in this atmosphere of devotion, of worship. And so that's how the temple came about. Basically, it was, we did the Pratishtapana in 2001, shortly after 9/11 occurred. And it was a very, very deeply emotional and sad time.
Very shortly after, right?
Very shortly, 2 weeks after.
Yeah.
And we did ceremonies to pray for all the souls who perished at 9/11. And to release them from the bondage of being stuck on this earthly plane. Their journeys could continue, and for their families as well. So we started off the ceremonies with these types of worships, and then after we did the Pratishtapana. So from 1989 until 2001, that was the germination time of thinking about, wouldn't it be amazing to have something like this in Manhattan? So in those years, what did I do? I learned how to do puja, and I learned how to chant, and I studied Sanskrit and all these different types of things, so that, not knowing I was preparing for that. So when the time came, I would at least have a little bit of eligibility to perform worship on a daily basis, so that the temple could actually be there. So all that time was sort of preparation time. There was a similar thing when my guru passed away in 2009, and it was right before we were starting the yoga class in the morning. And I called up our priest in Queens, and I said, Guruji passed away, what should we do? And he said, well, I'll come in, I'll be there in a couple of hours, and we'll begin the prayers for him. And so Prakash arrived at the temple. We informed everyone what was happening, and we sat down and we started doing the chantings. And I thought to myself, as soon as we began, this is what I've been studying and memorizing these texts for so many years, so that at this moment, I knew what to do when he died, so that we could do these prayers for him and for his soul as he continued on. And so it was a similar kind of a feeling, like you do all this preparation not knowing what you're preparing for, but when the time comes that you need it, it's there for you, and you can do the right thing. You can do the proper thing. So, these are some of the things that I learned in India and from the Hindu tradition, like that you don't always know what you're preparing for, but you know that you need to be prepared. And a lot of the practice of swadhyaya, of the daily repetition of mantras, and the abhyasa of yoga or whatever it might be, is preparation for those transitional points in your life where a new energy comes in and you now have to begin operating on a different level. So
that's it. Kind of, I'll share just some quick thoughts about what you just shared, and I think it kind of segues into some of the topics that I wanted to bring up. But yeah, that's one of the things I appreciate about you, and I appreciate when I see it in other people, was really you just want to be a good student. You just want to really learn, and so you put in the time and the travel and the study and the practice, and you kind of absorb yourself deeply in that tradition, and then in a sense you wait and see how it manifests, perhaps.
yeah, exactly.
Wisdom of the sages is that for Raghunath and myself, but 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, we wouldn't have been thinking that this is what would be a large part of our life. But it's just, we kind of put in time and study and practice, and then somehow a door opened and we started doing this. In your life, I see that as it's really manifested in a beautiful way. When you were on the show last, when we had you and Mike Dion, and we spoke about the Broome Street Temple, and I shared, briefly how I had been living as a monk for 13 years or so, and I was kind of stepping back into my old world, downtown Manhattan, with a bit of a mission now, to learn yoga, asana, and so on. And when I walked into you could call it a studio, but it was certainly, as Raghunath was saying, it was much more than a studio. But when I walked in there, it instantly, it felt very different than any other, quote unquote yoga studio in Manhattan or in New York, maybe even in the Western world, and I could immediately relate so much to it. And so as I got to know you, our friendship immediately was kindled, and I really began to appreciate the integrity, the integrity with which you're presenting yoga. And so let me begin with this question. As a person who has traveled and studied widely in India, what do you see as important differences between how yoga is understood in India and how yoga is understood and practiced in the West today, in 2020?
Okay, I'll try to answer that. Here I'm tell a quick little story which will segue into that,
Sure.
which I don't think I've told you before. I might have, but I don't think I have.
Okay.
So when you first came to the Broome Street Temple to start practicing, my morning classes were filled up, and so you were practicing in the afternoon, and Jocelyn and Govinda were teaching in the afternoon class, and Jocelyn had told me that you had started practicing. We hadn't met before, but she said
That's right.
She was the Hare Krishna who started coming.
Teacher.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so one day I came down shortly after you had started, and saw you practicing in the afternoon. And as soon as I saw you practicing just the Surya Namaskar, I just thought in my mind, he's practicing like an Indian practices. He's not doing yoga like a Westerner, but he's looks like an Indian person practicing yoga. And so I said to Jocelyn, okay, I'm gonna take him. And so I decided to steal you away or adopt you from the
I didn't know that
afternoon class, because I wanted to teach you.
Okay, I had no idea.
Yeah. And so what does that mean? Like, what does it mean to practice like a quote unquote like an Indian? Well, what that means to me is that it's very ingrained into the devotional movements that our body is our body so we can use it as an instrument to serve the divine or to serve God. Like all of the attributes that we've been given are to be used in service. And so when you practice yoga with that idea that my body is an instrument to serve the divine, that's what your yoga practice looks like. Mm-hmm. But if you are born with the idea or have ingrained in you the idea that my body is mine to use for my own ends and my own gains, and I want to make it more fit, or I want to make it more flexible, or I have some stress that I want to reduce, or I have a digestive problem, or I'm having a hard time sleeping, then you're going to do, and all those things are problems that, yes, they should be addressed, but you're going to do yoga in such a way that you're taking your physical body to be something that you need to maintain for the sake of your own quality of life. And a devotional point of view is that, yes, the body needs to be maintained for quality of life, but what quality of life? So I can serve the divine. And so that shows through the way someone carries themselves, the way someone does an asana, because our mentality, our mind, our mentality, our self-perception, and our body are a continuum. These are like the same things. How my, whatever is going on in my mind is going to be expressed through my body. And an example that is an easy one to give is if you're a student, say in high school, you don't want to be in school, you hate it, you didn't do your homework, you can't stand math, you haven't done your homework in weeks, and you're sitting in class and you know the teacher's going to call on you, what do? You slump down, try to hide behind your hands, you look like you're really busy. So your body becomes a reflection of your mental state. And it doesn't just become a reflection of the mental state. Your body is your mental state. Your body is your emotional state. And that's a physiological fact. Even though there's not a comfortable definition of the mind yet from a Western perspective, but our body and our mind are a continuum. What's happening in the mind is reflected in the body, and things you do to the body can also impact the way that your mind is functioning. So if your mental state and your self-perception is, my duty in life is to serve the divine, and I see the divine not only in the icons that I'm worshiping, but in all beings, that is how your body will move through the world. But if you have this idea that my quality of life is important so that I can accomplish this, that, or the other, which is not a negative thing, it's just a cultural thing, that's how your body will move through the world as well. And one of the things that happens with a yoga practice, any kind of yoga practice, where you're using your body, you're using your breath, you're using your awareness, you'll begin to have a shift over time where your awareness will begin to move, quote unquote, inward, which means you'll become aware that you have awareness. And then the way that you use your body and the way you do your yoga will begin to shift. But you came into the yoga school with that already, and I saw that and I thought, that's really cool, and that brings me back to India immediately, and I want to hang out with this guy. So I'm
glad you did.
So that's basically that. So what are the differences? Well, I think that's one of the main differences in the Hindu culture is whether or not young Hindu men and women have been raised with this type of an outlook. It's ingrained in the country. You land in India and you feel different. And so the approach that I see with Indians practicing is that there's some little spark already there that that taps them into a different sensibility, a different feeling, a different touch to the practice of yoga. And the Western culture is based on something different. Especially in America, we're founded on this idea of individual rights, autonomy. And we think that our individual rights give us the freedom to do, as I've said before, and as I say in the book, whatever we want, whenever we want, in any way that we want to. And that's not freedom, that's hedonism and indulgence. And so this idea of being autonomous is actually an excuse to be indulgent. And that leads to, you know, tremendous amount of disease, of mental instability, of indignant self-righteousness, you know,
Conflict.
ridiculous presumptions of conflict that, you know, the right to bear arms, for example. We're the only country in the world that abides by this ridiculous notion that someone needs to carry a gun. We have the highest rates of gun violence in the developed world. And now, over the summer, the rates of gun violence have skyrocketed. We've had 1,000 shootings in New York this year already. That's unprecedented. And we haven't seen that since the 1970s.
Right.
And so, but, you know, we're wired as interconnected beings. We're wired to grow together and to connect together. We're wired as social beings based on how our brain is and how the nervous system is, and how we're born and held, and the expectation to be held and to be cared for, and to be connected from the time we enter into the world. So we are an interconnected species, and we're an interconnected world. And this idea of utter autonomy and utter independence goes against what we are as physiological and biological beings. So there's obviously going to be a split. So if we try to live our life in such a way that we feel, not just that we're aware, but we feel the need that we have to support each other and to be with each other, and that we are connected, entangled, whatever word you might want to use, then you're going to live your life, you're going to do your yoga, you're going to speak your words in a very different way than if you feel that independence is the ultimate goal. So in India, what I felt when I was there was this idea of autonomy was very different than the American idea of autonomy, that there was an idea of sovereignty of your own soul, of your own self, and that you could make decisions, but that your decisions were going to be based on something deeper than just being independent, but your decisions were going to be based on whether or not you were living in alignment with the purpose of your life, which was dharma. And the dharma was going to be dictated by a few different things. It was going to be dictated by society, but it was in culture, but also about what you felt your own eligibility and motivations were that were going to be nurtured in you as you were raised and as you grew. What talents do you have? You know, what things do you feel pulled towards that you're naturally good at, however small those things might be. And so the idea of dharma, of purpose, not just, and of duty, but also of individual purpose, the purpose of a thing. The purpose of a thing is inherent into the Hindu culture, but the purpose of a thing is not inherent as in the American culture. So as Raghunath Maharaj has said on many occasions, and said it beautifully, that you know, we should love people and use things, but instead we use people and love things. And this is very much describes a Western mentality. And so we need to, you know, see how we can help to flip that in the other direction. And the influx of Hindu thought and Buddhist thought into the Western culture is helping us to make that change. And I think that's one of the ultimate blessings of this tremendous wave of Hindu thought and Buddhist thought coming from India and Tibet to the West, is that now we have a thought structure and a model and a practice that can help support us to make that change, to go through that process, because we didn't have that before. Like I've said to you before, when I was 18 and I was on a spiritual quest, and you guys also, you were young when you started, that we were on a spiritual quest, but we didn't know it because we didn't know the word spiritual. And we didn't have the format to support that searching. So what did we do? Instead of getting initiated into things, we went to drugs and alcohol and, you know, punk rock and all these types of things, because that was serving our quest. And then we found ISKCON, or we found yoga, or we found whatever. And then it was like, oh, here's the support system I need for my inner yearning, for the thing that's really pulling me.
Okay, you
Can
just
we
you
can we
just
uh can we vote for this man for something? Are you running for any office that we can support you?
that was a lot of food for thought there.
Yeah.
Let me maybe summarize that and share. I share something. But in a sense, I asked you what's the difference between yoga and the Eastern yoga and the
Oh
West.
yeah,
And
I don't know
well,
if
no,
I
but
answered that.
no, you did. At least I think you did. And I hope I understood you correctly. But you're saying that you have two cultures that have very different ideas about what is the purpose of life? What are we meant to do? And one of them is kind of has these very ancient traditions whose effect is still there in the psyche of the people on one level or another, right? It's maybe rapidly decreasing in modern decades, but it's still there. It's still alive. And then you have another culture that's kind of practically founded on the idea of independence, individual independence, and which can easily kind of manifest as a type of selfishness. Um, and so with these two different mentalities you approach yoga, you're going to see it manifest in two different ways. Maybe that's a very general kind of summary. Would that work? Would that summarize
Yeah,
it somewhat well?
and I'd say, you know, the way that just to you know, I'm not like down on America. I'm not down
Right.
on having rights. We definitely need rights, but sometimes we take things to extremes. And America is not devoid of religion. We have a strong a base of Christianity, and there's a small amount of Judaism in the East and West Coast primarily, and other religions existing here as well. So, for example, when Pastor Tillman started coming to practice at the temple, and I've always called our yoga school a temple because we had a temple there. So, so when he started coming there, you could see with him also that he knew he needed to work on his body, but he needed to work on his body for what? For a higher purpose as well. Mm-hmm. And he used to tell me that he would, at the end of his practice, when he sat doing the deep breathing in Padmasana, or in his case, just sitting up on a pillow, that's when he would contemplate his Sunday sermons. And he would write his Sunday sermons after he finished his yoga practice, sitting there deeply breathing in the temple. And so this was his background, was a deep Christian faith, and it continues to be. And he used yoga to heighten his faith. So he did yoga in a devotional way. Yeah. In a Christian devotional way. In a Christian devotional way. So when we say what's the difference between American yoga and the Hindu yoga, is that there's a sense of devotion that I have noticed for the most part in most of the Indian people I meet who are practicing yoga. And in most of the Western people, the idea is a little bit more geared towards self-improvement. We have a tremendous self-improvement market here in America, which has helped to drive the yoga and meditation movements as well. And so self-improvement and yoga and meditation have almost become synonymous in their presentation of what it is that you're doing. Transformation, you know, et cetera, et cetera. These are all self-improvement types of words. And in the yoga perspective, what is there to transform? Nothing. Yourself is already pure. Nothing can be done to yourself, to your inner self, to your Atma or Purusha, which will make it anything more than it already is. It's already whole and complete. It's already fulfilled. So the only project of yoga, pranayama, meditation, japa, and surrender at that point is to begin to remove all the things that are blocking that are clouding that. Right. And then when you remove those obstacles, that could actually be a segue towards why I wrote a book. When you begin to remove those obstacles and those clouds, then the self shines forth as the self alone, unblemished. It was already pure. There's nothing to transform. There's only things to seize identifying with.
You know, you mentioned that point, and earlier, as you're speaking earlier, I'm forgetting the exact words you used, but you said that every object has its I don't know if you said it's nature or its purpose or
Yeah.
you know, or you could say it's dharma, right?
Yeah. The purpose of salt is to be salty.
Yes, right, exactly. And so, you know, there's a fascinating book called Jaiva Dharma, was written by one of the acharyas in our lineage, 19th century acharya, Bhakti-yogi Thakur. He wrote a book called Jaiva Dharma, which is basically it's one of those books where it's kind of just like it's a dialogue between teacher and student kind of thing. And that's the theme, I guess. The central theme of it is that every object, including the Atma, has its dharma. And that yoga or bhakti is meant to uncover that dharma, and particularly in the bhakti lineages, it's going to emphasize that dharma is ultimately like divine love. It's which manifests as loving service. And I just yesterday I was watching a little comedy clip, right? A little YouTube comedy clip from this. I forget his name, but Raghunath and I like this guy, Sebastian. What is it?
Maniscalco.
Sebastian
Maniscalco.
Yeah. So anyway, he's funny. And
which clip? I've been binging on him this week.
Oh, it was it was a clip of him being interviewed by Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan is saying to him, like, what are you into? You know, like, what are your habits or what are your hobbies? And he was like, you know, I don't really have any like hobbies. It's like I do this comedy like all the time, you know. But he says, but what I like is hospitality. And I thought he was about to go into like he likes to receive hospitality. Like, I like to go to a hotel and, you know, and be pampered and stuff. But what he was saying was actually, I like to host others. He says, I'd like to invite
you come to my house, you get an Orangina. You can't find that anywhere.
That's what he said. I want to find out I want to find out what you like, and what you like. When I invite you over, I'm going to give you that. You know, and he was even saying like, hey, I don't smoke marijuana, but I got some at home, because if that's what you want, I'm going to give you that, you know. And it was just like saying, but I found that very interesting and very consistent with this idea that if at the very core of the being, right, you know, if the soul by nature is designed to love and to serve, then we find that that's actually where real happiness comes from. And so here's a guy kind of discovering it. You know, like, when I think about life, if I think deeply about life, I'll find the most meaningful and even the happiest times are when we're giving of ourselves to serve others. And so, you know, I love this idea of how in Indian culture, like, for instance, if take Hinduism and Buddhism, and imagine, you know, or let's say witness the effect that they've had on Asian culture. And I think that even plays out, like, if you look at airlines, right? Like, they'll say, from what I understand, I've never flown Singapore Air, you know, but
it's good.
But that the Asian airlines have tremendous hospitality. Whereas, you know, American Airlines struggle with it, you know, because it's hard to get.
I'm scared of those United.
Because it's so much easier, I would imagine, to instill a mood of hospitality in someone who's kind of grown up, whose life has been informed by, say, Hinduism or Buddhism, and, you know, where it might be more difficult, where someone has where the idea of independence, you know, has been deeply ingrained in them.
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea of servant in America is like, you want to be a servant? You want to be you know, I signed from going to integral yoga when I was younger. They'd always answer the phone, and I lived around the corner from integral yoga, and they'd say, how may I serve you? How may I serve you? Mm-hmm. And I was like, that is such a nice thing to say. Like,
where should I start?
Well, let me I got a list. Hold on. But this idea of being a great servant, it repulses Americans. It's like, are you kidding? I'm trying to surround myself with servants. You want to be the servant? It's quite shocking. And it like puts a spoke in the wheel of like almost like American thought. And what to speak of airlines, if you hang out in very high spiritual circles in India, it's shocking how these people of even a great, you know, financial caliber, or they're erudite yogis or something, they have this gentle mood of, how can I take care of this, you know, Raghunath, this like, you know, monster from the Lower East Side. They have so much care and consideration. It's almost shocking. My wife, the first time she went, she was like, I'm shocked by how many people want to take care of me. And it really takes us out of our, and it makes it's almost confronting with like, why aren't I taking care of people more?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is a very nice point. You know, and the word care is an important word. And, you know, and in fact, yesterday there was a little online Ashtanga Yoga conference that I was speaking on with a bunch of other wonderful teachers. And I spoke a little bit about caring communities, you know, and how to build or create one. And just some of the reflections I've had on it. And part of care is, you know, number one, taking care of others, allowing others to take care of you, and also taking care of yourself. And things like doing some daily sadhana, that's a certain amount of self-care, you know, worshiping, asanas or pranayama if you do them, eating a clean diet. These are all kind of self-care things that, you know, what if that's built into your culture? Yeah. And if you look at, say, let's go back to the Taittiriya Upanishad, which is quite old. You know, we're going back over 2,000 years, maybe more, but a minimum of 2,000 years.
5,000.
2,500 to the Taittiriya Upanishad.
Eternal.
Exactly. When it was written down, I should qualify that as. So we know it existed for longer than the time period before it was written down.
Many centuries.
You have Matra Devo Bhava, Pitra Devo Bhava, Atiti Devo Bhava. Now actually Acharya Devo Bhava, Atiti Devo Bhava. So let your mother be like a deva, a god unto you. Let your father be like a god unto you. Let your acharya be a god unto you. And let the guest, the atiti, the one who has arrived with no appointment, let them be like a god to you as well. And so these are the final instructions that the acharya or the guru gives to the disciple after he has completed or she has completed her studies.
Oh,
and there's
the context.
Yeah, that is the context. It comes in the very final anuvakas of the first chapter or the first book of Taittiriya Upanishad, where the Acharya says, Satyam vada dharmam chara, speak the truth, adhere to your dharma, never leave off your study and your teaching. Do not neglect the truth, do not neglect your dharma, do not neglect or be careless about kushala, what is good and what is proper, and do not neglect what is bhutyai, do not neglect your well-being. And then let your mother be a god unto you, let your father be a god unto you, let your guru be a god unto you, let the guest be a god unto you. So these mantras are repeated billions of times over thousands of years. And these things that we repeat, the mantras we repeat, those become our subtle body that manifest through our mentality, that are expressed through our body. And so if that's what you're repeating for thousands of years, billions of times, that's who you become. What you repeat and what you think, that's who you become. And if what you have is a culture that is only a couple of hundred years old, which is chanting independence, freedom, autonomy all the time, that's what you become, and that's how you behave. Then you use power, domination, control as your modality of interacting with the world. And that's going to lead to a lot of conflict. And then on the other hand, you can have, well, what if you use caring and love and care for others in a sense of interconnectedness and worshiping all beings as though they are divine, which they are? Then you're going to develop a very different type of a culture. So that is, you know, just following on, Raghunath, what you were talking about, caring, a caring society, a caring culture, caring communities. It's a way of thinking, a way of believing, a way of talking and expressing. And so I've been thinking a lot about that lately because we have so many problems in the Ashtanga Yoga world, the Ashtanga yoga community. A lot of yoga communities are struggling with sexual abuse and with fractured divisions within the community. And, you know, I know that ISKCON has had its fair share in different types of ways of this as well.
Sure.
And how do we?
Everything has.
Yeah,
the Catholic Church has. The Democratic Party has. The Republican Party. Everybody has.
Everybody. So, you know, what do we do? You know, how do we behave? How do we think to not only heal but not repeat those wounds? You know, we want to heal and not repeat, and get better at all this stuff.
Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. You know, I don't know. I think we've shared, and maybe we shared enough, but what you're saying, you know, you hit on a topic, but the way you did it, you know, sometimes I go on a little bit of a rant about self-care, because I see what's presented in its name sometimes is kind of like, in my mind, like a misappropriation of what yoga is. Like, it becomes about pampering, right?
A mani and a petty?
I'm sorry?
Mani and a petty?
I'm not saying you shouldn't get a mani and a petty, but
because I'm about to get one.
Are you about to get one? I saw you shaved your head and your face. So
that was my self-care. I shaved, but yeah, I still have.
You look great. You look great.
Thank you. I still have feet that resemble a Sherpa.
Who sort of like those, Raghunath?
They're like clog feet, and my profession has me walking around barefoot, so it's sort of problematic.
You're a farmer, you know, you're supposed to be that way. But the idea of self-care that you're sharing, that you're taking, you just gave us an Upanishadic view of self-care, right? Which I think is you know, so important and helpful. That yeah, I should neglect my well-being. You know, I should give time for my well-being, but that's coming within a context of how I'm respecting every living being, and ultimately, you know, seeing myself, you know, as a servant, you know. And if self-care is for that purpose, it's a very different idea than if self-care is for my pampering of myself, or even let's say the pampering of my body and my senses. You know? Now let's okay. So this has been an interesting conversation so far. I want to take it. I want to push the envelope a little bit here, and say, okay, we've talked about how yoga comes, how it can be filtered through, let's say, the lens of Western conditioning, and could manifest in ways that maybe don't, that aren't consistent with its tradition. So it seems like we're talking about cultural appropriation. And do you, as a person that's immersed yourself in the practice and the culture of yoga in India, and of course have been brought up and live in and teach that tradition in the West, do you see a concern about cultural appropriation, or how do you understand cultural appropriation in this context of Western yoga?
Right. I think it's a very good question. And I think that cultural appropriation is an important topic because especially the way that yoga and now mindfulness have been lifted from the land that it was born in and then used in the West for tremendous financial profit. You know, an entire industry has been created around these things that a lot of people are benefiting from. And in terms of money, in terms of fame, in terms of power, and quite often very little credit is given or acknowledgement is given to the places where they come from. So particularly, you know, the mindfulness movement, for example, not particularly, but as an example, mindfulness comes from the Buddha. And it was a practice that also included loving kindness practice, forgiveness practice, breath practice, and then this practice of mindfulness. It was like a fourfold thing. But very, very rarely do you hear in the circles where mindfulness is being taught that it is a Buddhist practice and that it's dependent on these other things. because it's been sanitized so it can be sold. It is of benefit to many people. That's true. And in the same way, you know, you have yoga being sold and being used in a way that doesn't really acknowledge the Hindu tradition. This is what the Hindu American Foundation was getting concerned about years ago when they started their Take Back Yoga campaign, which, though I might have had some disagreements with the campaign, I ultimately agreed with the thought process and the feelings below it, which is that yoga comes from Hinduism, and whether or not Hinduism was called Hinduism 5,000 years ago doesn't matter, because that's what it's called now, and it comes from this tradition. So you can't say that yoga is not a Hindu practice, because it comes from within that tradition. So, but this is not acknowledged a lot, and I see, you know, places, for example, in Yoga Journal, which was one of their arguments. Yoga Journal was very happy to say Buddhism right, left, and center, but they would, when it comes to yoga, they would call it yoga philosophy or Indian thought or something like that. But they wouldn't say Hinduism, and the reason they gave for that when questioned was that Hinduism was too much of a loaded term. Now, how did that come about? How did we get to a situation where all of a sudden Hinduism becomes a loaded term, but Buddhism doesn't? That's probably
could it be because you're not giving it credit for all that it has to offer?
Yeah, or you know, or you're still living in a colonialist mindset, and you're believing what you know the British have done within India and how they've categorized Hinduism, and you use that as your basis for defining the culture. But you don't experience the culture from within itself. You experience it through the eyes of how the British decided to advertise it to the world and what they needed to do to the Hindu culture to push it down in order to have power and control. That's a lot of the legacy that we have. And so now, just to go back to your question about cultural appropriation, I think a more direct question would be, do I think that I myself am culturally appropriating?
Oh, I didn't want to be.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I'd rather answer that question than answer, like, what do I think about it in general?
All right.
I have to say that I think at this stage of the game that as much as my life is founded on yoga and founded on the practices I've learned from the Hindu tradition and that I engage in, that I have adapted as my lifestyle a culture which is not my own. I'm an American. I'm from a Jewish tradition. I have not renounced my Jewish cultural heritage, but my beliefs are completely aligned with the Hindu thought systems, which includes yoga, which includes the whole ball game. And so, because I am adapting a culture which is not my own and living in accordance with it, although I do it with the greatest amount of sincerity that I can muster and love and appreciation and respect, I still think that I am culturally appropriating because it is not my culture. I wasn't born into this culture. But that begs the question, is culturally appropriating a bad thing? Maybe not. Maybe the word appropriation doesn't have to have all bad connotations. Some people say there's a difference between appreciation and appropriation. Well, you know, what if we looked at appropriation like stress? And the word stress is a neutral word, which is borrowed from science, from physics, actually. It's borrowed from physics and used in psychology and in physiology to describe the effect that environmental demand has on your nervous system. How do I respond to this situation that I'm in? If I respond positively to it, it's called eustress, which is a stress that will help me grow. If I respond negatively to it, it's distress, and it will cause me to get weakened in different types of ways, or develop anxiety, or high blood pressure or a host of different things. Stress is neutral, but it can be either positive or negative. Well, what about appropriation? Appropriation could be positive and negative too. There could be a positive connotation where we say, I have a deep appreciation and an alignment, and I feel pulled towards this, as if, as Krishna says, purvabhyasena tene vahriyate yavashopi saha. You've experienced it in a former life, and you were pulled to it in this life, and as if against your will, like a magnet is drawn towards another magnet. So if that's your pull, you almost have no choice. You're pulled towards. This is what you're going to end up doing. And in that, you have appreciation, gratitude, thankfulness, and sincerity. It still might not be the culture you're born into, but you bring all those things to it. So therefore, as you appropriate or take on the thing that you're practicing, you do it with the best of intentions. And so therefore, it might not be a bad thing. But if you take it on and you don't acknowledge where it comes from, and you use it for financial gain, for power, for control, for fame, for thinking that just because you can do it, you can use it, and you can own it, and it's yours, then that might be a negative appropriation. So that's right now how I'm thinking about it. What I really should do is go on to Google and look up the roots of appropriation and pretend that I already knew it, and then give you an etymology of the word and explain that's why it was. But I'm not going to do it. I'll look up appropriation later and see what the roots are. But you see, even in political systems, in the government, there are going to be appropriation bills where you take certain things and you give it to something else so that it can be used in that kind of a way.
Sure.
So it might not be, we need to look this up and then figure out if anything I've just said is accurate, or if you need to delete that from the Facebook stream, just like put a big long bleep like I've been giving an expletive or something in a rap song.
Mare is our intellectual of the show. What do you think, Mare?
Well, I do have the definition of appropriation
there
here.
You go.
Like
Let's hear it. There we go.
In the US,
rolls
it's
off our tongue.
negative.
It's negative. The action of taking something for one's own use, typically without the owner's permission.
Ooh, okay. So forget everything I just said, if that's the definition.
Well, the typically is the modifier there.
Did your guru give it to you? Then you didn't take it without permission.
Well, that's a good point. What is the what are the roots of the word appropriation in Latin or Greek?
The origin is late Middle English, from Latin appropriatio, from appropriare, make one's own.
To make one's own.
Yeah.
Mara's private schooling just finally pays off in a big way.
I think Mara is a cultural appropriation of cooking. I've had some of her Thai food. I've had some of her Chinese food. And she's not Thai or Chinese.
So,
and I don't think she got permission for it either.
Mara, if it is to make one's own is the roots of the word, and we go back to the roots of the word, then maybe what I said isn't so wrong. I've made it my own. But I've made it my own in the most positive sense. So there could be perhaps, we'd have to talk to a linguist, there could be perhaps, and I don't know, I just was thinking about this past week, an argument for this, the root of the word to make one's own. You could do it positively or negatively. So you can let me know what you think about that, because again, I'm happy to drop any of my thoughts and opinions at the drop of a hat if I'm wrong. But Raghunath, I like what you said about, if your guru gave it to you, then you haven't taken it. That's really nice. I like that.
Well, I think the Sat Guru, the guru's teaching eternality. They're not seeing you as an American. This is what's different about this type of appropriation. They're not seeing you as American or Jewish. They're seeing you in the Sanatan Dharma view of the world, that everybody is a pure spirit soul. And culture is part of your temporary body. As far as I have brown skin, dark skin, light skin, born in this country or that country. For what? A few days? A few days I'm born into an Italian-American New Yorker? That's like renting a car. I'm not a Kia, right? So I think the Satguru is saying, this is a pure spirit soul. He's lost in Maya, and I'm going to give him truth to feed him so his GPS can be recalibrated and he can get back to divinity. What do you think about that, Eddie?
I think that you're not a Kia. I think you're a Jeep Wrangler, but one of those new ones with the big Outback, like one of those really cool ones.
Do I have a lift?
You do, man.
The top's definitely down, that's for sure.
I know, man, me too. I think that I like what you just said, but I really resonate with this idea that if your guru gives it to you and initiates you and tells you to do it, and you're doing it with permission, then it is not this negative sense of appropriation. I like that a lot. And that is certainly the case for many of us. We have gurus, and our guru said, go do this. And Kaustubha Das said an amazing thing yesterday when we were talking in our pre-interview session, that a lot of your sampradaya has been in preparation of these teachings spreading to the West, and that the preparation of Western teachers is built into the sacred texts that you are following. And so therefore, if it's prophecy and if it is all in preparation, and if this is what you're doing, then what you're doing really is not appropriation in a dharmic sense, because you're following the command of your acharyas and gurus.
You know, there's so much that we could say about this. How I feel that even with good intention, this idea could become convoluted. And sometimes even those most concerned with social justice will adopt a position in relation to yoga that actually goes entirely against the grain of ideas of social justice. For instance, if I say that it is cultural appropriation and wrong for a Western person to teach yoga, well, really what I'm supporting is a view that's been used for oppression in India. You know, how the varnashram dharma can be warped into what's now called a caste system, and how people can say, well, based on my birth, I can take the role of a teacher, but you can't. And qualification doesn't matter. Now, I would argue that if you actually go to the tradition itself, if you go to Bhagavatam, if you go to Gita, you know, one's role is based on guna and karma, it's based on one's qualities and one's behavior, as opposed to one's janma, one's birth. So if I want to respect this tradition, then let me go to the tradition itself, see what it has to say. And if that tradition says that anyone with the qualification can teach, well, then it would then my way of honoring it, then it would be honoring it to accept that, and would actually be appropriating or misappropriating to deny any person that becomes qualified to teach it. And that would be just the beginning of my rant about cultural, how cultural appropriation, again, it's an important topic. And what I've appreciated about our conversation so far is in you, I see a person who's put in the time, put in the effort, gone with the respect, and lived it with the integrity. That's how we're meant to approach it. And that's how we're meant to teach it. And if we're doing that, it's actually honoring it. And if someone that is less informed comes along and tries to see it through a very modern lens of perhaps well-meaning, social construct, they may actually convolute the whole thing.
It's possible. And but what I don't want to do is I don't want to offend Hindus who feel that maybe something I've said or something I've done has offended them, and that they consider it to be that their culture is being used inappropriately. And when that happens, and when people say, hey, this is what I think you're doing, then I like to discuss it with them. And I like to hear what they're saying and listen to them and correct my course if I need to. And sometimes they, sometimes I do need to correct my course, and sometimes maybe, they're not quite looking at it through the same lens as I am at that point, or whatever. And we can find a place, usually through conversation and dialogue, where we come to some sort of an understanding. That's possible with some people. It's not possible with everyone. There's some hardliners who say no white people should be doing this. So you can't dialogue with those people. But that's the nature of the world. They're always going to, not everyone's going to agree. But I appreciate what you said, and I like it. And I
feel better then.
And I do think that having an attitude of respect and an openness to listening and dialogue is a very important part of people trying to work together in the world to to use all of these things properly in the best way.
Yeah, respectful dialogue. You know,
Yeah.
that's what helps us bridge the gaps.
Yeah.
And as we're running out of time for our respectful dialogue right now, we still have a bit of time, but I just want to talk about your book a little bit.
Great.
What's the one simple thing? What is it?
Yeah, what is it one? Are you gonna now? I want one. I want one word. I want one word here.
Yoga.
There you go. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night. Enjoy your salads. I'll be here all week.
So what is it? What is it? The one simple thing, and what is it that you're trying to convey through your book?
Well, that one simple thing really is yoga, and so there are two couple of things. Number one,
Okay.
on the easy entry fashion, I had started doing work with scientists doing research on yoga, and what I noticed was that the protocol that I designed for the different studies didn't seem to make a difference on the outcome, and that I did a study on pre-hypertensive conditions in African Americans with a scientist named Marshall Hagens. And I put together a modified Ashtanga yoga practice, and it was primarily women in the study, a couple of men. They were all in their mid-50s and upward. Most of them were overweight. Most of them had never exercised. And we did this very sort of gentle modified practice. After 6 weeks, almost all of them had their blood pressure greatly reduced. And we had 126 6 weeks.
Of like a
3 times a
half-hour
week.
practice?
An hour, 3 times a week.
Okay.
And they did some home practice as well for about 20 minutes or so. And there were 126 people in the study, split into 2 groups, and our group had a reduction of blood pressure, statistically significant, almost equal to statin drugs. And so that was great.
Mm-hmm.
And then we did another study, a 40-week study of yoga once a week versus a gym class once a week for high school students. And we measured their grade point average. And I did a very similar type of protocol. And in a 40-week period, we saw that the students who were doing yoga had a 2.7% rise in their grade point average over the kids who were just doing regular gym class.
How much time was that again?
40 weeks, once a week.
Okay.
And so what I started wondering was why is that so? What is the mechanism that yoga is doing that balances out the thing that needs to be balanced? How does the nervous system know that? How can 5 different people, and I said this in the intro in the book, how can someone with back pain, someone with digestive problems, someone with a little bit of stress or anxiety, someone looking for meaning or purpose in their life, someone who just wants to get a little bit more fit, they all walk into the same yoga class, they do the same sequence, and they all leave feeling a little bit better. Now, if you go to a doctor, and if say you're a doctor and you specialize in cardiovascular health, and I come to you with back pain, you're not going to have the answer for me. You're going to say, you got to go see that other guy. And if I come to you with digestive problems, you're going to say, I can't help you. You got to go see that guy. And then I come to you with problems with sleeping. I can't help you. You got to go see that guy. I come to you with a heart problem. Oh, I can help you, and let's measure some stuff. So, but yoga doesn't do that. Yoga says you have back pain. Yeah, come on. You have digestive problems. Come on. You have heart disease. Come on. You're looking to find God. Yeah, come on in. And so everyone can come do the same basic things, and what they're looking for gets addressed. And I wonder, how does this happen? What's the mechanism? So that was what the book was investigating. And then what that led me towards was basically, I thought that, in terms of physiological things, of physical things, and even some mental things like anxiety or stress, our autonomic nervous system, which is a part of our nervous system that keeps our body going so we don't have to think about it. Breathing throughout the day, heartbeat throughout the day, blood pressure, digestion, we don't have to think about. Sleeping, we don't have to think about. We have to lie down and it happens. Being able to grow a baby, all these types of things are the autonomic nervous system is controlling so that life can continue. And if we support, and this is called homeostasis also, that our bodies, well, there are 2 different things. One are the autonomic nervous system functions, keeping our vital systems going. And then 2 is homeostasis, the ability that our body has to maintain balance. And so that means in body temperature as well is an autonomic nervous system function. So if it gets hot outside, our body temperature is going to change to deal with the heat. If it's cold outside, our body temperature will automatically change. We don't have to think about it. The body responds, and this is part of homeostasis. Homeostasis uses a lot of the energy of the body to maintain itself. And if we support homeostasis, things function pretty well. If we don't support homeostasis, things don't function that well. How do we support homeostasis? We exercise the right amount, we get enough sleep, we eat the right food at the proper times, we maybe do some meditation or deep breathing during the day, and we also behave in such a way that we're thoughtful of others and we have gratitude and appreciation. This greatly affects homeostasis. So these are like 5 basic things that I saw were fitting into the practices that yoga was teaching. Like for yoga, you don't just do asanas, but you do breathing and meditation. You eat right, you get enough sleep, and you behave in particular ways as well. So it started seeming to me that the first 4 limbs of Ashtanga yoga, which were how I treat other people, yama, how I take care of myself, niyama, exercise through asanas, and breathing through pranayama, and then also the 5th limb, little pratyahara, controlling my sense organs. These were basically to support homeostasis. But for what end? You don't want to just support homeostasis because that's all you do, because then you're a perfect being who can live life. No, there's like this higher purpose as well. There's this investigation of who am I? What am I doing here? What is the purpose of my life? And how can I serve? So for that, I started looking a little deeper. And I wondered, well, okay, in the 2nd chapter of Yoga Sutras, we see that Patanjali says there are particular actions in yoga which will prepare you for samadhi, absorption, into a deep state of absorption. So the only thing that remains in your field of awareness is the object that you are meditating on. And the meditator disappears. Only the object remains. And then that prepares you for kaivalya or for moksha. And I looked at these 3 actions, and they were tapas, which is austerity, something you do with your body, something you do with your breath, something you do with your behavior as well, like yamas. These are tapas, these are austerities, because they're a restriction. And then swadhyaya, the repetition of mantras, the study of texts. So these are 2 things that are physical, something you do with your body, something you do to restrain your body, and something you do with your voice, with your breath, through chanting. And then the last, Ishvara Pranidhana, this is surrender to God, or completely laying yourself flat or in alignment with Ishvara within, the seer within. So, and this is more of a mental, emotional bhavana. So the first 2 as physical actions, I thought.
Bhavana means?
Bhavana means a mood or emotion which is associated with an action. You offer incense to Lord Krishna, and your mood is of devotion, of offering. And so the action and the mood are connected. And so this is bhavana. So I thought, why would the yogi suggest doing something physical in order to attain something transcendent, which is beyond the body, beyond the emotions, beyond the mind, beyond the breath, beyond identity? Why would they give something physical? And so then we look at the next verse, which is the 5 kleshas, or the 5 obstructions that cloud knowing who we are, and the 5 obstructions that that cause us to suffer. The first one is avidya, not knowing who you are. When you don't know who you are, then you have asmita, a false narrative, a false idea of who you are, which is based on raga, the things you like, and dvesha, the things you don't like. That's our narrative. You know, I love youth of today. I hate the Bee Gees. You know, that's
truth right there.
That's truth.
That's
raga.
I actually like the Bee Gees. I might even like the Bee Gees better than you did today.
No, I just didn't want to get it wrong there for you, Raghu.
Okay. So I think I sing the Bee Gees more than I sing you the Today songs if I'm walking around the house. You can't tell
by the way I use my walk.
I was singing that yesterday.
Were you? It's a great song. I love the Bee Gees.
It's a great song.
So but raga and dvesha are like 2 sides of the same coin. I like this thing because I'm set apart from that other thing that I don't like. And then what do? We cling to all that. We hold on to it. And that's abhinivesha, the clinging to a false idea of what we think life is. And that also,
was so eloquently said. I've never heard it said as eloquently, the kleshas as that.
Well, I'm probably getting it wrong, but thank you. So so what is this clinging? America. So the clinging of abhinivesha to life, to this false sense of it, is also a fear of extinction, a fear of non-being. If I'm not these things and I don't know who I am, I will cease to exist, and that's terrifying. So I thought, okay, none of those things sound to me like they're physical things, yet I'm using physical modalities to deal with them, because Patanjali says by practicing tapas swadhyaya ishvara pranidhana, you are going to weaken or thin the kleshas and prepare yourself for samadhi through physical stuff. Why? So I went back to the physiology and I thought, okay, well, let's look at the autonomic nervous system again. Our heart, our respiration, our heart rate, our blood pressure, our need for sleep and digestion. These aren't just autonomic functions, but these are called our survival functions. The autonomic nervous system is maintaining the survival functions. And what do? Those make sure we cling to life every moment of the day. That's the job of the survival functions, to help us cling to life, to make it so that if anything happens, we come back to clinging. And so, for example, if you hold your breath for a few seconds, 30 seconds or 45 or a minute, at a certain point, your body is going to tell you to breathe. Why? It doesn't want to die. So it's time to breathe. Now, the same thing can happen with food. Like if you don't have food for long enough, at a certain point, your body's going to say, time to eat. And so, and if you're a person who's not comfortable with that, you'll start to panic. You get angry or irritated. You think, if I don't eat something now, I'm going to die. That's your body telling you time to eat, or you're going to perish. So the yogis, this is what my supposition was, said, okay, the survival functions of the autonomic nervous system these are the physiological reflection or location of the kleshas. So what happens if you restrain your breathing for a little while every day and you transcend this physiological idea that my breath is sustaining my life? And what happens if you can control your heartbeat and your blood pressure through asanas for a little while every day and transcend this false idea that that your body is your true only home, and then that's all there is to it. So all of the things that the yogis suggested, asanas, pranayama, meditation, diet, sexuality, all of those are transcended through restriction of asana, pranayama, meditation, we already said, proper diet, and brahmacharya. These are all of the practices that are going to transcend autonomic nervous system survival functions for a little while every day or through great long periods of our lives, that show us, who am I if I don't identify with breathing? Who am I when I don't identify with my heartbeat? Who am I if I don't identify with my sexuality and the need to have sex or to always have a partner? What is left over when I don't get lost in the survival functions? And that's where you enter into the transcendent zones of identity, of a higher or deeper identity beyond survival function. And that is processed through higher level brain functioning as well, in the limbic system, in the prefrontal cortex, where these processes are not being created, but where they are being reflected and shown. And so that's essentially what I wanted to write about. And I passed that idea by a few scholars, Subhash Kak, who's an amazing Vedic scholar, and he's also a doctor. I believe he's a physicist. And Deepak Chopra and Murali Doriaswamy and a few other Hindu scientists that I know. And I said, how does that sound to you? And they said, sounds pretty good. You should write it up. And so, and so that was the supposition I came up with. And that was basically, those were the twofold foundations for my book, to investigate those two things.
It's fantastic. You know, Eddie, thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, you can see that, as I mentioned earlier, Eddie, he's a good communicator. He's the Yoga Sutras, it's a big collection of somewhat hard to understand aphorisms, and you explain it and bring it out so well. So please, if you're interested, check out the book, One Simple Thing.
That was incredible. That was incredible, Eddie. Thank you so much. So insightful. And to hear it from a fresh perspective like that, I really needed to hear that. And I know we have a lot of yoga teachers listening to the show now that got a lot out of it. And I can tell by all the comments on the Zoom board.
People in the medical field too. People working with youth. If they want to get in touch with you, and your website, is that the way? Or
you can get in touch with me through eddiestern.com. And you can also get in touch with me through Instagram at Eddie Stern.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much, Eddie. And thanks for everybody joining us. Thanks to everybody for joining us. Everybody on Facebook. Yes, look, Eddie's already, he's been trained. This is how we end the show. We dance a little. If you're listening on Facebook, thanks for joining us. We do this every day at 5 a.m., but on Saturday and Sunday at 8 a.m. And if you want to join us live on Zoom, it's fun. We all see each other. We have such a big community here. You just email Mara, our assistant, at wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com, wisdomofthesages108@gmail.com, and she will give you the secret codes that you can enter into this family. And I want to thank everybody for supporting us through patreon.com/wisdomofthesages. This is a community-supported podcast, so your contribution makes it continue on. And because of it, we've also created a whole yoga school online that is filled with regular asana classes, as well as yoga workshops on everything from meditation to mantras to cooking to Ayurveda. And it's a really great resource for people who are interested in yoga culture. Thanks again for joining us. And now we will end this. This is how we end it every day, usually early in the morning, but now it's a little later, 9 in the morning, 9:30 in the morning. We just chant and sing in our chair at a computer.